Alexander, thank you for joining us this morning. I guess the first question is, your kind of profession is you're a professor of economics at Cambridge. So what have you made of the economic sanctions that have been put on Russia? Do you think they're proving successful, or do you think we need to go further as an international community?
I think the international community needs to go further. Unfortunately, they're not enough to stop the war. These are quite serious sanctions, but they will only start working in the medium run. They will put more pressure on Russia's economy in the medium run. And unfortunately, that's not enough to stop the war, because Russia is still selling oil and gas in large amounts at record prices to Europe. And that allows it to fill its coffers and continue financing the war.
Mm-hmm. So what else would you like to see then? You mentioned their oil and gas. Would you like to see sort of European nations completely cut themselves off from Russian oil and gas?
Well, at least in a stepwise embargo. That's right. So we need to put pressure. For example, oil is about 1/3 of Russia's revenues in terms of the budget revenues, and oil is relatively easy to substitute away from. So Europe could relatively easily start putting an embargo on oil sales from Russia to Europe, so oil imports from Russia, and that is quite realistic, and that would put serious pressure on Russia's ability to keep financing the war effort.
Mm-hmm. So, Alexander, I want to ask, I mean, you've been in the president's inner circle throughout the invasion. What has that been like, and what sort of pressure have you felt on your shoulders?
Well, we've had pressure, enormous pressure on all of us over the last month and a half, ever since the war started. We've had to restructure the way we work, restructure the way we live. We've had to go way beyond our usual spheres of responsibility. I was mainly responsible for economic areas before the war. Now it's much broader than that. It's weapons, it's negotiations, it's speaking to politicians, media, and so on. So it's quite difficult.
Mm-hmm. And Arlene just now spoke about the new Russian general who's been drafted in. Does that make you concerned, given his sort of past track record in Syria?
That's right. So we've heard this actually a couple of days ago. Well, I wouldn't say it makes us any more worried than, given what we've already seen. I don't think, Russia's track record in Syria is particularly good or, speaks for their particular efficiency or effectiveness or skill. So we'll see what happens. But certainly the bloodbath on their side will continue.
And can I ask, Alexander, obviously we overnight have seen pictures of our own Prime Minister visiting Kyiv, and will that be largely welcomed? Obviously it's welcomed by the leadership in Ukraine, but will it be largely welcomed by the citizens of Ukraine to see someone like Boris Johnson making the journey to Ukraine to stand in solidarity?
Absolutely. I think Ukrainians are, quite happy and delighted to see Boris Johnson and other foreign leaders come to Ukraine at this stage. It's a sign of deep solidarity, and we're particularly grateful to the support we've been receiving from the British people and from Britain in general when it comes to weapons, when it comes to economic support, and just standing with us in this crisis. It's been enormous.
Mm-hmm. Paul, any questions from you?
Well, I mean, there's been some effort between the two sides recently, hasn't there, Alexander, in terms of peace talks where delegates from both sides met. And after that, particularly the most recent round of talks, I think a week or two ago, there were suggestions that the two sides were perhaps edging towards an agreement that would result in a ceasefire. And the discussions were over, future status of Ukraine within NATO, etc., and the Crimea. But unfortunately, that hope seems to have evaporated. What's your understanding of where things lie in that regard at the moment?
Well, that's quite right. Ever since, the Bucha massacre and the other massacres that the Russians have been conducting, firing the rocket at our civilians trying to flee, after our government made the statement that people should be trying to get out of eastern Ukraine, once we saw what is happening to the civilians in the occupied areas, like in Bucha, this is what Russia reacted with. They started bombarding and killing these civilians, probably in an attempt to stop them from fleeing. So, of course, that makes negotiations much harder. We still have to try and, give it the best shot that we can possibly give it. But I don't think the the effort on the Russian side is sincere or, truthful. I think they've always been interested in a military solution. That's what the Russian leader always wanted. And this whole idea of having peace talks was just there to basically deceive the West into thinking that further sanctions aren't necessary, that perhaps there's going to be a peaceful solution, and so further sanctions aren't necessary. And that's basically their strategy, just trying to fool the West into this sort of thinking.
Can we just talk about President Zelenskyy, Alexander? Because he really has been the face of the war effort in the international community. He's spoken directly to parliaments and various assemblies and to world leaders. How is he?
I think he's doing well. He's, he's very focused. He's obviously, morale is very strong on his side and in general in our government. He's really holding up really well and just trying to push forward and, just lead the country, which he's doing.
Mm-hmm. And it seems to me like he's got the support of the entire Ukrainian population behind him. Is that about right?
Yes, that's exactly right. So ever since the war broke out, all differences, all political difference that existed before in Ukraine have been put aside. The whole country's consolidated behind him. He's had enormous support ratings, somewhere around 95% support overall, and that continues.
Brilliant. Well, Alexander Rodnyansky there joining us, not only an economics professor at the University of Cambridge, but also key advisor to President Zelenskyy. Thank you, Alexander.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.